Okay, I think we're starting on the very last panel. Thank you all so much for being here. We've saved, I hope, the best for last. My name is Alexandra Carpi. I'm from the Center for International Private Enterprise, that's CIPE, and I'm so excited to be moderating this panel on business and media, business and disinformation. So since we only have an hour and it's been a long conference, I'll just get started by introducing our lovely panelists. So to my right, we have Ana Maria. Ana Maria is a psychologist based in Croatia, but as I understand it, she has years of experience in the NGO sector, also working on communications and development for both NGOs, but also international and national brands in Croatia. So we're very happy to have you here. Then next to Ana Maria, we have Joanna. Joanna is the director for the Center for International Journalism, Independent Journalism, excuse me, in Bucharest, Romania. But she has over 25 years of experience in media writ large, all sorts of advocacy work, journalist training, media assistance across the board. And I also have to mention that she is wrapping up a research project supported by CIPE with the Center for Media, Data and Society on business approaches to supporting independent media and combating disinformation in Czechia, Romania, and Serbia. Of course, you're focusing on the Romania aspect, but we'll talk more about that shortly. And then on the other side, Peter. So Peter is senior communications and PR specialist, if I can call it like that. He works at a leading agency in Slovakia, but he's also been active in the fight against disinformation for several years now. He's been a co-founder for Conspiratory, which is a unique ethical advertising initiative that I think we'll have some time to speak about in just a bit. He was also involved in creating CheckBot, which was Facebook's first disinformation spotting, media literacy bot, if I can kind of call it like that. So I'm very happy to have Peter. And then last but not least, Darko. So Darko, as I understand it, he works at Propulsion, which is a full-service agency for social impact campaigns and social impact work, and you work with NGOs and leading companies as well in Serbia and in Bosnia, correct? Wonderful. So I'm going to get started, and just to say a couple of words about CIPE, my organization. This is our first time at the POINT conference, and we are so excited to be included. We are one of the core institutes of the National Endowment for Democracy. So we're a democracy promoting organization that works in particular with private sector actors, and we empower them to be agents of democratic reform. And we're building out our media and business partnerships and trying to do what we can to empower ethical businesses, ethical advertisers, and connect them with ethical and credible media. So with all of that being said, Joanna, I want to start with you for our first question. So please, if you could just set the stage for us a little bit. What are the current challenges from the business perspective vis-a-vis disinformation? And if you could also speak a little bit of how we got to this point, what are some of the major trends that we're seeing from the business community?
It's all about technology, right? No, thank you very much for the opportunity to share the little wisdom we were able to gather through this study and through direct observations, because we live in those societies, we live on those markets, and this is one first point that I would like to make, meaning the business community is not only, I would say, the business part of it, is also the people populating the business sector, and those people are exposed to disinformation not only as professionals but also as individuals. We looked at the media project, but whatever we found there can easily be expanded to the other civic projects. So the first thing that hit us right between the eyes was the huge mistrust between business people and media people or civic activists. We have 25 to 30 years of living together, And we also have something that is called parallelism. It's a high political parallelism in media as it is a high political parallelism in business. Meaning whoever does politics has a media arm or a media friend or a media influence, and the same goes for the businesses. We have a saying, and probably you heard it, never hit a dog because you don't know whose dog is it. This is why the business is rather reluctant in dealing with media, because they don't know whose dog is it. And there is this assumption that you have to be somebody's dog. Being independent is, well, a rare occurrence in some people's mind. And this huge mistrust is actually complicating the relationship between businesses and media projects. But there were two elements that have been mentioned again and again during this conference, and it boils down to men, or people, sorry, to the people and money. And there is a very personal relationship between people and money. Our second conclusion is that people give money to people. It's not businesses giving money to projects. It's not enterprises supporting initiatives. It's people giving money to people they trust. It's a positive side to it and a negative side to it. The positive is that once you build the trust, the relationship of trust, this is supposed to last a long time. You don't have to build it every time for any new project. The bad part is that once your person in the company or in the project is leaving, the whole relationship clamps down. So basically, business people live in societies and they are victims of disinformation, not only as professionals but as persons, and that is only then they realize that they need clear information when they saw their kids being affected, and that there is a high degree of political parallelism and of personal relationship in that.
Yeah, that's very helpful context. I want to stick with you for a little bit, Joanna, and maybe we can get the other mic working. But I want to hear more about the research that I mentioned, and I know you mentioned it yesterday as well, because part of the motivation for that research, right, was, okay, we see this distrust, but that being said, there are ethical business actors that are trying to do particular initiatives to combat some of the things you're talking about. So if you can just maybe highlight a couple of examples from your findings of cases in which businesses have stepped up to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem that you were talking about.
Okay, I will. Well, there are several models, and some of them are replicated all over the region, and they are not, I don't know, specific to the region. Supporting prices for media is one very popular way of supporting the media. Problem with prices is that they are not only genuine. Not always genuine. They can bear strings attached. And we saw companies giving money to a gala ceremony where the marketing director of the same company received the prize. So it's a vicious circle. So we are disregarding for the moment this kind of relations. There is the sponsored content that is growing around the region as a new form of promoting your company. It has its backlash as people tend not to trust the content that is sponsored by a company, even if it is genuinely journalistically done. So, to focus on the positive examples. What I saw in Romania, there was the trend to support narratives that are no there. In one case, one particular businessman, and he was a man, remembered that his mother had to suffer following an abortion, an illegal abortion, back in the 70s and 80s. And when he saw the pro-life movement getting stronger and stronger in Romania, he said, not again, I do not want other kids to go through the pains I had when I see my mother almost dying. And he put his own money into developing a journalistic project. He insisted on having it as a business project. I want deliverables, I want a timetable, and I want a dissemination plan. What is under these chapters is negotiable. The chapters themselves are not negotiable. And this was a very good service that the business part brought to the journalistic project. This kind of management thinking. I'm not interfering with the content, but the delivery process has to be very clear to everybody. And it worked pretty fine. And his motivation was to cover a topic that everybody else was reluctant of touching because it bears political and popularity prices. You know, people do not read you if you touch sensitive questions. The other example is of a bank, of all possible businesses, a bank supporting 3 independent publications. Not 1, not 2, but 3. It's culture, is education, and it's new technologies. The bank is called Development Bank, the Romanian Development Bank, and they said, what is development for us? What are the 3 pillars of development that we would like to support? Said, education, culture, and new technologies. What is there in terms of media content? Almost nothing. We have to support this. And again, it was a very long and very delicate process of fine-tuning the mechanism. Each publication has a different form of organization, has a different form of funding. All of them claim to be independent, editorially independent, which I do not dare to put under question. But it was the very same idea. What is missing in the society that we think it is important? So out of these two examples, the main lesson is that if you want the business side engaged, you have to find what is important for that business to see in society. On the other hand, as a business organization, you have to look at the society and see what is your contribution, what is important for you as a business to have in the society. Otherwise, it's just nice projects to have. Sounds a little bit nasty, but when you go with a project to a donor, you have to have a selling point. And when I say selling, it's exactly what I mean. You have to have the unique selling point, what is important for the company to invest in. And when I say invest, I mean 5 to 10 to 15 years. It was mentioned in some panels that it is important to have a long time presence. Otherwise, 6 months projects, 5,000 euros, this doesn't count, this doesn't help.
Right, right. Darko, I want to bring you in here too, because I know you also spend a lot of time working with leading companies on media literacy type projects. And we were speaking before about some of the motivations that you've seen from these companies to join the kind of projects that Joanna is talking about. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that work, and also if you can just maybe help us understand what motivates some of those business actors to get involved in those kinds of projects as well.
Sure, thanks for that. Let me add to setting the stage, right? When I started with this work, like 10, 15 years ago, you had a bunch of company people on one side, and all of us, media, activists, even agencies, on the other. And that was the time when Facebook was entering our lives. It was the time when no one really took it for serious. You could go on Facebook and do something really business wise. I mean, I clearly remember that in 2011. When businesses didn't take Facebook or any of the social media for serious, or when civil society didn't think that 7 million people or 9 million people in the Balkans being on Facebook is somehow relevant to them or to us. Because you said we're a full service agency / foundation. Because we come from a civil society background. We are a civil society 2.0 or 8.0 or something point something. Because this kind of change happened from the Arab Spring, which we heard about previously, to where we are now. And where we stand now is in an environment where, when you wake up in the morning, you really wonder what has gone to hell that morning, and what part of the world is burning, and what societal groups are clashing around a key issue that you thought was resolved, about a key right that you thought was long gone. This is the world we live in. So more and more actors in that world, including companies, understand that in that world they have, it's not about doing business and bottom line and profit margins. It's about them being someone in that world, doing something in that world. And it's clunky, it's clumsy, they're trying, they're finding frameworks, they're calling it, CSR, ESG, which stands for environment, society, policy, whatever, but governance, governance, exactly. I mean, they're looking for frameworks within which they can find themselves being, active contributors or active citizens in this kind of world. I also clearly remember that previously we needed to really convince people, really, tell them it's super important, do this, it's up to you to invest in the new generation of leaders. Not anymore. They're coming to us. They're asking us and telling us, look, people, I mean, obviously there's some community you have some kind of interface with. Obviously there's some kind of interest that you can spark, not only with business ideas, but with values. Is there a way we could leverage this? And these ways are what we are kind of offering, what Joanna says, our selling point. We're trying to help companies interface better with the society they operate in. We mentioned before, the difference between the international, multinationals and locally run companies, but more and more these borders are being erased. More and more local companies understand that this is the society they live in, and what they do and how they do it will shape it, will crucially shape it. On the other hand, when you look at the data globally, but also in the Balkans, you see the markets are changing, the consumers are changing, the generations are changing. Generations, the Gen Z now, or millennials as well, they expect brands to engage with the most pressing issues of, of today's world. Whether it's the freedom of speech, whether it's the birth rights, whether it's Pride Month, they expect brands to deal with stuff. And then, even though it's not about bottom line, in the end it is, because you cannot convince your consumers it makes sense what you're doing if you don't engage on these important issues. Now, this what I'm saying, I know it sounds super like kind of international, and what one might wonder if this has something to do with the Balkans. It has to do a lot with the Balkans. This is how our brands more and more understand they need to do business in our countries as well. What I can tell you also is that they are more and more interested and aware of the fact they are media outlets. They have hundreds of thousands of followers online. They are literally in people's homes. This, what I'm saying, is an example of a furniture manufacturer. And they said, we enter people's homes not only with our chairs and tables, but with our content online. What we put there, how we engage people there, is the way how they're gonna understand the world that day. Because the probability the audiences and the consumers will consume traditional media on any given day is getting lower and lower and lower. So we get the whole generations who shape their view of the world on what they consume online. And in that online world, brands are a huge factor. How we engage with brands when it comes to media and digital literacy is exactly in this way. We are trying to help them understand their role as media outlets, help them formulate some kind of editorial policy, because it's not only about selling anymore, it's about values, it's about how the society works. And we also try to tell them there's no state that's going to deal with important issues anymore. It's you who needs to do that. In that, we've had some success, but also we've seen brands with whom we engaged, telecoms, banks, multinationals, retailers. We've seen that they've undergone internal changes from one-off projects and programs to being responsible media actors. This is a trend that I think cannot be stopped anymore.
Yes, Darko, I think you're right to point to the fact that there are private sector champions, there are ethical brands, but I think we've also heard a lot in this conference that there are moments in which those actors seem few and far between. And I think the media market as a whole and the infosphere as a whole still has a long way to go to really empower those actors, right? And to lift those voices up and not, continue to spread mis and disinformation on clickbait sites and, unethical sources of financing, right? And so, Peter, I know you had your hand up and maybe you wanted to speak a little bit about this or add something.
No, I just wanted to follow up on what Joanna perfectly said and Darko equally perfectly. I think it all comes down because we as an agency also work for clients or also corporate clients on social impact campaigns. And from my experience over the course of a couple of years is that it all comes down to a right mixture of emotional and rational arguments, what usually convinces the clients or the brands to actually engage in topics. The emotional comes or goes after the person, because it's always a person to person, right? As you perfectly said, usually it comes down from the leaders. So the leaders should care about the state of the society they're facing, especially when it comes to disinformation, because this is such a widespread problem that it impacts them. And what is the consequence of disinformation is decrease of trust. And the society where nobody trusts anybody is a society where you can't do really a business, or you can't really live, you cannot make any progress, because nobody believes in anything that we have in common. So this is the emotional part. Also, the second emotional part that was also behind our project, because we are a public database of disinformation sites, is actually facing the brands with the screenshots of their brands being next to, for example, a cure of cancer, that you can cure cancer by eating baking soda or eating frozen lemons, or being next to a Holocaust denial article, and you can show the brands like, guys, you can spend your marketing budgets on better sites than this. But I will maybe get to that later. But back to the rational side, I mean, and there is a huge buzzword, as I'm pretty sure, Darko, you know about brand activism, but it's not entirely a buzzword, but it's part of the rational world. It's not only about the emerging customers, the Gen Z customers that are more and more careful about what the brand stands for, what are their values, if they share the values. But it's also about maybe also giving them this simple rational argument that you can't do business in a society where there's no trust. But also we try to encourage the brands that not only see this, because this is a heated topic, obviously. And the difference between corporate social responsibility and brand activism is that you are not only going to face your friends, you are also going to face your enemies, that people who will not like that you are engaged in this or that way, especially when disinformation comes. But you really have to engage yourself also in issues that will not only bring you friends, but you have to really have to face it. But it's not only about crisis communication; it's also about opportunity. And we ran a couple of nice campaigns for O2 in Slovakia, and the recent ones last year. We use a deepfake video with other partner agencies that actually show that you can't trust everything on social media, because and it all comes down from the brand that realized that by providing mobile data and providing smartphones, they are very much aware of the downsides of their own technology, and they wanted to do something to mitigate that. And so they wanted to explain people the dangers of fake news and disinformation, and also bringing about the change. So, for example, when you watch the video, you were invited to go to a website, you finish the media literacy quiz, and you get rewarded with unlimited data. Or say you basically done your driving license for the internet, and now you can use it more responsibly. So. And that's a great opportunity. It was the most viral video, organically viral video that they ever done. And so brands should. I would like to encourage brands not to look on the issue of disinformation only as a problem, but also as an opportunity. So that would be my intro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great segue to you, Anna Maria. I know you work with brands, and I'm wondering from your perspective, what does ethical advertising, ethical marketing look like? And I mean, where are we at vis-a-vis those goals? What are the challenges? And from your perspective, are there opportunities for us to push in that direction for more ethical advertising standards, or, more ethical marketing? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, I think I'm very naive when thinking about ethics and advertising, and listening to what you both were saying about brand taking a stance and taking care. I'm always disappointed how we have to tell the brands, oh, Gen Zers or millennials want you to take care, because I feel if you're a business or a brand, you should take care. There shouldn't be a research that tells you, you should take care because someone else would trust you more. Considering ethical codes, they've been developing through years, that's for sure. And I was looking at how many times ethical committee in advertising meets in Croatia, and it's once a year. And I'm pretty sure they could be meeting more than once a year. And I'm also sure whenever they meet, there could be more than just one ad to discuss. Because usually when I look at the reports, there's only one ad being reported. And then they say, oh, it's unethical, and then nothing specific happens. In the US, the fines are bigger. So definitely brands there face with bigger consequences. But I also wanted to come back to disinformation because that's something that's not explicitly discussed in ethical codes. It is in a way that brands are prohibited from creating false ads. But we don't see it anywhere that brands should not advertise on media that is sharing disinformation. So Peter said something about it, and what we also see throughout, specifically in the past 3 years, a lot of big brands such as Amazon or Nike or Google placing their ads on such sites that are promoting Russian propaganda or anti-vaccination or COVID conspiracy theories. And therefore, unknowingly, they are also enabling the existence of that media. They are funding that media. At the same time, they're trying to do things to block the conspiracy theories from spreading or to stop working in Russia. So first, I think it's very important for all the businesses to be aware where their ads are being placed. And it's not only about the online world. We also see different media publishers offline placing digital billboards or different billboards. For example, we had an example, I think it was 3 years ago in Canada, where a media publisher placed digital billboards that were spreading some information about anti-vaccination. They were taken down after the public reacted, but the publisher itself said, okay, that's okay, because probably nobody checked what the information on the ad was. And on the other hand, ethical codes are more dealing with false ads, and now I think comparing to past decades, brands are definitely more aware, but at the same time, it's not that they are not having false ads, but it's a little bit subtler. For example, they would probably add something that's supposedly good in their product, and then they would advertise the good part of the product, but they wouldn't say, oh, but the product itself is bad for your health. They would just say, oh, this ingredient we have will enhance your well-being. And I think the third part that's definitely something to discuss from the ethical point of view is being passive. Because if you are a business and you are in the community where you're expected to do something, so you shouldn't only be reacting to when something happens, but you should be doing something before it happens to prevent it from happening. And that's what I think a lot of businesses and brands are not doing. And that's where I see, growing edge for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, I think this is a perfect place for you to jump in and talk about the specific tools that you have developed with Conspiratory to address some of the things that Anna Maria just raised.
Yeah, the idea was fairly simple, and we were really pleasantly surprised for how many friends and how many brands and agencies were willing to adopt it, because it's basically a public database of disinformation sites in Slovakia and in Czechia, because you know we have very similar languages and overlapping media landscapes, so it makes sense to do both countries. And we basically set up a review board. Anybody can report the website to them, and they score the website based on 5 criteria. It's also on the website. It's also in English, so feel free to open it. And we started to elaborate and build a list, which is one part. The other part is we also have automated script that advertiser can install into Google Ads platform, which is probably the most widely used. And it automatically blacklists these sites from the advertising campaigns. And we started this 6 years ago, and more than 100,000 ad campaigns are automatically protected in Slovakia and Czechia by this script. And also we have some manual download, so anybody can download the list, they can edit the list. I mean, if they feel like they don't want to appear on all of these sites, they can handpick which one to blacklist. And first we thought that we will only do it for our clients, but we made it public, and it worked very well. Like lots of media agencies, digital agencies, PR agencies really jumped on and started to using that. And that also confirms Joanna's point that it's always good that business makes solutions for business. So it's like a B2B solution. We basically create it for ourselves, and that's why I think it's one of the reasons it worked so well. That we understand how advertisers think, what's important to them, and how easy it has to be for them to use it. So that's how we did it, and it proved to be working. And we were also crazy enough to do that, because obviously you will not only meet friends, especially the disinformation outlets are not so happy about being on the list, but that's the risk of doing that.
Yeah, and how has it been bringing this approach to the Balkans? You know, I mean, how has there been a lot of reception to those kinds of initiatives, or I mean, what have you been seeing? I know this is a new area you're going into.
We've met only a couple of advertisers from thanks to Zaštone, from Bosnia, Montenegro, and Serbia. The reception was quite well. Even by the fact that how brands can really take on the issue of disinformation. Maybe I would also use this opportunity to invite you for a workshop tomorrow at the Holiday Hotel at 11, where we together with Emir from Zaštone will be developing ideas, like sharing you some best practice that we had, but we don't want to be those telling you how to do it. We would like to share like what worked for us, what didn't work for us. We are happy to share our own mistakes, so people can learn from it, and also to brainstorm like what because each market is different, and we can see it. Even Czechia is different than Slovakia, so Balkan countries are totally different. So we would like to brainstorm about the ideas how brands can tackle disinformation in this region. But we are happy to share all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of resources that we have, how the website works. We are happy to give it to anybody who is willing to do such a project here.
Yeah, and Darko, I wanted to speak with you more about the media literacy that you've been doing, because you do have you're in Bosnia and in Serbia, but I know we were speaking before this about that work you're doing in Serbia in particular. You know, in the region, it seems in some ways like the most closed media market, and to your point, Peter, everything is so dependent on each market. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about the initiative there, and maybe any lessons learned you have from your work there.
Yeah, thanks for that. The gap in regional societies, I think Serbia especially, but also Bosnia and some others, is huge. I mean, the gap, the political gap between opposing sides, the gap between the, let's say, independent media and government-inclined media, the gap between one vision for concretely Serbia and the other vision for Serbia. I mean, it's a hugely divided society. You can see that in elections, you can see that anywhere. And it's a huge question for a brand what to do then. We were commenting previously that it's a question, it's a key question in the region. Whether you, as a brand, you decide to boycott particular media outlets. But if you do that, I mean, you lose half of the market. Or you decide not to go on particular portals. But if you do that, again, half of the country won't be reached by you. There's also a literal war between cable distributors and operators and content providers. One being in the shape of state-owned and run telecom, and the other one in its private counterpart. The private counterpart started as an independent media hub, but more and more they're becoming a behemoth with similar intentions, but just on the other side of the mirror. It's super complicated to find yourself a spot in that landscape, and within it, you as a brand or a brand manager or a communications person within a company need to be very savvy and super practical. Like, and I know that from our own experience. I've heard sentences like and thoughts like, well, they're licensed, they have a license from the state to operate. Who am I to interfere? I mean, I'm going to advertise. Or they're already there and my competitors are there, so who am I to judge? I mean, obviously that's a place to be. I mean, even ourselves, even us with media and digital literacy agenda, this has been a working arrangement because our idea was, if I'm going to talk about spin, fake news, mis and disinformation, well, let me better go to media outlets who do that. Mixed results, I can tell you. But the lessons learned from this landscape, it's a crazy world. That's one. The other one is the brands are looking for a safe haven. They're looking for a place where the likes of them, I mean their colleagues, their counterparts, the agencies, the media, can speak freely. We've seen some success in making platforms. Anna Maria knows. I mean, there's this platform we're really boosting in Serbia called Cactus. It's a communication festival, right? A regional one where you can see brands really wanting to gather there and talk about the pain points, right? That's one method. The other one is they want to talk about these issues using their own channels because they see the value in creating an image or creating an environment within which it's okay to talk about critical thinking, mis and disinformation, fake news, problem solving. And they are also acutely aware of phenomenal features that Serbian audiences have. When you ask them whether they know what fake news are and how to spot them, they say, yeah, yes, we do know. You test them, they kind of do. You ask them what media outlets spread mis and disinformation the most, and they mention public broadcaster, two major national broadcasters, a couple of tabloids, right? And in the same research, and I'm telling you this because it's our research, I've seen the data, I've seen the raw data. You ask them, where is it that you gather the information about the world? The same national broadcaster, the same two private broadcasters, the same tabloids. In that environment, which, you know, I'm reluctant to call it crazy, but it's really super turbulent. In that environment, being a brand wanting to do something can only work if there's a platform where you can connect with your counterparts, and if there's a way to engage meaningfully in particular niche issues. What Peter was mentioning, the telco operator being engaged in digital arena, well, that's exactly the mirror case we have in Serbia. We've been working with Telekom Austria, who's present in Serbia within their brand A1, right? They care about it. They're aware of the same fact. They sell phones, they sell access to internet. Obviously, that has to do with them. Or the pharma company, AstraZeneca, which no one have heard of before the pandemic. We've been working with them for half a decade now. They understand that they need to engage in what turned out to be key expertise in the pandemic, and that is health literacy. Discerning truths from misinformation, discerning facts from outright lies. So, you know, brands are understanding this, and they need a credible partner. They need credible partners. I hope they found, some of them at least, found those partners in us, but also increasingly in other agencies and civil society actors. So limited scope of tools, but these are the tools that can work in these markets.
Right, right. And Anna Maria, I mean, was some of what Darko was saying resonating for the creation context for you? Or maybe you can speak about the particularities of that context if there's not an immediate overlap. I mean, I think I'm curious as we survey the region as a whole, the particular challenges in each of these contexts.
I think we heard yesterday something about the media in Croatia, but I think it's as crazy as in Serbia. But what I find to be similar is not connected that much to media, but to way businesses operate. So what Joanna was saying, that it's very important to find something that's connected with your business. I can see that businesses sometimes are just trying to be socially responsible, but without strategic thinking. For example, we had this O2 example, which makes a lot of sense because there's a logical link between disinformation and the product, or they had a campaign when you drive and text. So there's a logical link, and it's very important to have that link, because if the brands are talking about something they know nothing about, why should we trust what they're saying? And that's what I see, and I think it's a part of a broader picture, is that we want everything right now and right away, and there is less and less strategic thinking. And even when we have small children, we want to give them everything right away, because frustration is something we can't handle, and frustration is something that's crucial for development. And that's transferring to whole advertising world, to media world, where it's very hard to handle frustration, and where we think as businesses often think, oh, our customers want everything right away and right now, and we have to give them everything right away and right now. And when there's no strategic thinking, then the results are not as good in long term. And that I think is very similar in the whole region.
Yes, Peter, please.
Just a short remark, strategic or good strategy behind it definitely needs to work, but it has to go hand in hand with authenticity. And this is something that this O2 case managed to do well. For example, I have really big troubles. I don't really like the campaigns when an alcohol company is telling me to drink responsibly. This is something I have really hard to believe. So you also have to really put the brand in a situation that is authentic to it, and that people will actually believe that they really mean it. So just a short remark.
I have it listed. I have listened closely, attentively, and with pleasure to what our colleague said. And I will come back to what Peter said about the opportunity. And I think that these crazy times are a very fertile moment for us to challenge everything we knew and we took for granted for now. Businesses made a point of avoiding emotions. They look at the figures, and if the figures look great, it's good enough. Or it used to be good enough. It's no longer good enough now. So it's, as Peter said, is the opportunity to challenge themselves to get into emotions. And it makes sense. We say that we live in an emotion-based economy, because in media, what we actually want is to steer emotions from the reader or the consumer. So I think that it's a good opportunity for the businesses to challenge themselves and deal into their own business or company emotions. There is a risk avoidance in all the funding that I've seen. There is a tendency to avoid risks. Well, face the risks. You cannot please everybody, and you have to take this as your own responsibility, do what you think is fair and is good for the society. Not only does it social responsibility, not only as, you know, something that you have to check in order to look good on this ISO evaluation, but something that you think it's useful for the society. On the other hand, as journalists, we have learned for years that we have to separate editorial from the business. That journalists should report and the business part of the company should take care of money. We are no longer in that situation. The best journalism nowadays in Romania is done outside regular newsrooms. It's done through independent projects. And journalists who were very tough in covering very sensitive and touchy issues found themselves in the situation to manage a project, to fundraise, to report back to the donors, and they feel this as a betrayal to their work. So it's the time for journalists to revise their idea that money and journalism should be separated. Maybe they should merge at some point. It's a very difficult and painful process for both groups, media and businesses, because it goes against the business model. So basically, you have to reinvent your business model, you have to reinvent your attitude toward your market, toward your clients, toward the projects you support, in order to make it work for the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And as I said, it's not simple, and it's again about people.
Well said. So I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. If anybody has any, please.
Thank you. Anna Maria, you mentioned that brands lack of strategy, and yeah, that's more true. Do you think that maybe having a code of conduct for their employees, in a way preventing them from spreading disinformation on their own channels, could be a helpful step in fighting disinformation if they cannot do nothing more? And a short question for Peter. You said that disinformation websites are not happy. Have you had threats or any kind of campaign against you, and how do you deal with it? Thank you.
I think that's a good idea to have a code of conduct, and at the same time, I think its premise would be that the business is not ignorant and well educated on how to recognize this information and how to motivate the employees from not spreading it. So those are, I think, two main steps before having the code of conduct. Because what I feel is that when people are informed, they would spread that information less. And we heard a lot about it in the morning and also yesterday. But what I find to be also very, very interesting is that brands are always worried how being placed next to, let's say, fake news would ruin their reputation. And what we saw is that people don't see your brand as distrustful if it's placed next to fake news, but they see distrustful if they don't see the source as credible. And that's also something that is important for businesses, where they appear, not just if they appear next to fake news. So yes, code of conduct sounds like a good good thing, but I think education is the first step.
And if I can just add to what Anna Maria said, I think this goes back to the point that we made earlier in the panel and before we sat down when all of us were speaking, that there's a big difference between multinational corporations that have the capacity and awareness of these things to go into those kinds of processes and local businesses that are really playing catch up on what this is, right? What the threat really looks like and what can be done. And this is something that I know Ioana has found in her research as well, if you want to just add or...
I just wanted to make a linguistic clarification and conceptual clarification. Disinformation is information that is fake and is put in circulation willingly and knowingly. So fighting disinformation by a code of ethics won't work. So spreading information that is false without knowing that is false is misinformation. And that is, I would say, less blamable. So in the end, it boils down to education, to educate yourself and your staff and your clients and whatever, to make the difference between what is fake and what is not fake. So it's more complicated than telling people don't do it.
It's an interesting research. I'll answer your question later, but it's an interesting research because from my impression, at least in Slovakia, I don't see much difference between local brands and multinational brands. Like it's usually a matter of the leader. Like if they care. For example, I met a guy who runs an e-shop for pool chemistry, like disinfection, like a small business, and he uses our database. And judging from the number of campaigns that we are protecting, it looks like there's more than multinational companies. But it will be interesting to actually do a survey and to see how the attitude differs. To your question, yeah, obviously we were criticized from the day one. We started. We were also threatened by lawsuits. Some of them actually happened. We are fighting 3 disinformation websites in court. We are basically playing a match of legal table tennis with them. There is no ruling. We think that our freedom of speech is the key principle here. If they have a right to write crap, we have a right to tell they write crap. We sometimes compare it to suing Google Maps that you have bad reviews of your restaurant and therefore customers don't go there. I mean, cook a better food. We are still waiting for a principal ruling, but the courts in Slovakia are so slow, so it takes ages.
Thanks. Yeah, as Peter said, I think it's probably going to be eye-opening to find out about other markets, because I think we would agree that in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, we're pretty much blessed in that most mainstream media, maybe we can even say all, do not publish disinformation. But you know, in Serbia, I know, and other countries in the region, you do have mainstream media that are airing disinformation. So just a question for all of you, what do you do in that kind of situation? And Peter, I know this is very early on in your expanding knowledge, but what do you do in terms of blacklisting mainstream media? I know there have been some efforts in the US and things like NewsGuard, I guess, and things like that, but any ideas of how you expand what you're doing, or any of you, how you expand what Peter's doing to your countries where it's also the mainstream media which represent a major problem?
Well, if I may start, it's funny because we just had a chat before this panel that this is one of the toughest questions that we get. Like, what would you do if you run such a project in Hungary, for example? Would you advise the big brands to blacklist public broadcasters? You have to be really courageous, and you have to be a really hardcore brand activist to pull this off, and I understand that. So yes, we are glad that we are still in a country that has freedom of press, and it would be a tough call to do something like that. That probably explains why we haven't expanded to Poland or Hungary yet. So, and that's really difficult. I don't really have an answer to that.
And I don't know, for those from the other, have there been any campaigns like that to work with advertisers not to advertise with big mainstream media that are publishing disinformation or propaganda?
No, I haven't seen campaigns. Doesn't mean there haven't been any, but There are efforts, let me answer this in, let's say, US terms. If all of this is supply, then what we've chosen to do is the demand side, because we cannot influence a lot the supply side. Obviously, the supply is as is. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's within our powers to influence it now and in a noticeable fashion. But what we can do and what we are doing, and we're seeing some results, we're influencing the demand side, meaning working with actors who consume the content coming from different media outlets, and also broadening what media outlet means, but understanding what's disinformation and misinformation, as Jana was saying. I mean, also important to understand what's behind any of those information, working with advertisers to understand that, you know, choices they make up the media scene, working with brands to understand that it's not only about what the ads are about, but where you place them. We have had some success in establishing national ethical advertising council in Serbia. It gathers agencies, it gathers brands. However, it's a long-term process of education, as Anna Maria said, or working with actors who consume the content. It's the demand side, and when it comes to the supply side, I'm afraid it's a political decision. It's a political decision what kind of media landscape you want to have. We're seeing some pressures being put on both Serbia, Bosnia, other countries in the region to liberalize in that kind of way, but for the time being, demand, work on the demand. There you can have some results in mid to short term.
I'll be quick. I have to say that my brain is now working very quickly and hard because I see it as an ethical dilemma. And I'd be happy to discuss it after, because at one point we have to know that different media channels have different purposes. So TV's main purpose is awareness. If we don't advertise on TV, if we advise brands not to advertise on TV, then people wouldn't be aware of what they're doing. And if they're doing good, then they wouldn't be aware of the good they're doing. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. The other one is that, no, I'm not aware of any of these efforts being taken in Croatia. If I'm wrong, I'd be happy to, if someone is here to correct me. And so that's why I see it as ethical dilemma, because if people are unaware of the good the brand is doing, then the brand can have an impact. And at the same time, if the brand is also enabling sharing of disinformation and misinformation, then apparently is not doing good. So that's why I think it's a very hard question.
Just to complicate it a little bit more. Advertising is information, is commercial information, is a legitimate form of information, and just not placing it on certain channels, it impairs the right to know of the people following those channels. I'm not talking here about the small, nasty sites. I'm talking, as it is the case in Romania, of mainstream, as you mentioned, Jeremy, of mainstream being part of the problem. We have 2 TV channels with very high audience rates that are programmatically disseminating this information. But just because they have millions of viewers, you cannot afford as a business, and you cannot afford as an agent of free expression, not to place advertising on them. Not to mention that you lose money. So it's very difficult. One solution would be just to, how to put it, to objectify the bad character of those channels through the broadcast council if it's about broadcasting. Because there is a point in the legislation that allows the National Council for Audiovisual to sanction broadcasters for disseminating disinformation. So fine after fine after fine after fine, and then you have the objective measurement. These TV channels has the most fines for distributing false information, and then you have at least a kind of objectivity. But it's not simple. First of all, because it's a matter of freedom of expression, even the disinformation has the right to circulate.
So I know we've been at time for a couple of minutes, but luckily we have all night to continue the conversation. So thank you, Joanna, Anna Maria, Darko, Peter, and thank you, Point, for a great conference. Thank you.